Today, I am going to make up a homebrew store wine kit, ferment it, and whack it into the Clawhammer still to turn it into brandy. How's it going, chasers? I hope you're having a kick-ass week. I'm Jesse, this is Still It, and a little while ago, I made brandy from some super cheap boxed wine, and it actually wasn't terrible. It kind of turned out okay. So, let's take the next step, and we're going to use a homebrew store wine kit. We're going to need to mix this up, ferment it, and then get on to distilling to turn it from wine into brandy. Let's get stuck in. Step number one is to make the wine kit up. My kit makes 21 litres, so I'm using a 30-litre fermenter to leave a little bit of headroom at the top. And all you need to do is mix the wine kit, it's just essentially concentrated wine must, in with water. I would suggest using a mix of either hot water or cold water so you hit your fermentation temperature from the beginning. I'm aiming for 18 degrees Celsius for this one, so a little bit of hot water, a whole lot of cold water, give it a really good mix. And a little tip, guys. Kits like these, beer kits, wine kits, I have learnt to not trust the yeast packets. Who knows how long this thing has been sitting for, how long, at what terrible conditions. So I'm going to take this and throw it away and instead, add in a half teaspoon of Fermented K as wine nutrient and pitch a yeast that I know has been treated well because I've been looking after it. I happen to be using this by Angel Yeast. If you can, it's a good idea to temperature control. I'm temperature controlling to 18 degrees Celsius. We're going to let this thing ferment out. This took 10 days to ferment out, and don't worry about that, guys. If that is a little on the longer side, even if it takes 12, 14 days, I wouldn't stress about it, especially because I was fermenting it slightly cooler. It's finished out at 5.5%, slightly higher than what I was expecting from the wine. Definitely on the low side for distilling. So we need to get this into the still, but first, why not? Let's have a taste of the wine. Honestly, that's not bad. I'm not a wine guy, so I can't tell you if it's good in terms of a wine or not. I haven't cleared it out, I haven't let it sit, I haven't done any of the wine things, so forget about that. I'm thinking about this in terms of its potential for distilling. And there's a couple of really interesting things going on here. Number one is it already has some very interesting, robust, fruity flavors. It has that slightly Ribena-ish, like blackcurrant juice thing going on. It also has some more like darker, like plums, but interestingly, not like old sultanas, which is the flavor I dislike in brandy. It also has a little bit of a acidic punch, and those acids going through the still are likely to estrify and add even more fruitiness into the mix. So I think we have potential here. Let's get it into a still, shall we? This video is kindly sponsored by the team at Clawhammer. Thank you, guys. I appreciate it. So obviously, I'm going to be using their equipment. Over here, I have their 8-gallon pot, and their whole deal is that everything is kind of modular, easy to change around and build things the way you want, but I have their hybrid style setup here. In other words, you can break it all apart and run it just as a pot still if you want to. I'm going to run it with 2 plates today here, but I think it comes with 4, so you can choose as many plates as you want, and of course it means you can just buy extra plates. One of the things that I like the most about their setup though is that they have the option for a very generous, compared to the size of the still, shell and tube or shotgun condenser, which is great. So many other stills are let down because of the condenser being kind of lacking in my mind. So I appreciate this, very cool. Anyway, if you like the look of this equipment, there'll be some links in the description down below for you to go check them out. Enough talk, let's get this thing filled up and running. It's time to get all of our liquid out of the fermenter and into the still. I'm doing it by siphoning. Now, honestly, for me, this isn't actually necessary. The reason you would siphon is to leave all the crud on the bottom of the fermenter, because some strains of yeast, when you boil them and the cell walls rupture, end up tasting like ass. They're absolutely horrible. I know this yeast is actually all right. The problem is, this isn't one of these things that's like listed as a metric on yeasts, so it can be really hard to tell whether or not you need to clear the yeast out or you don't. Kind of personal experience. I'd love to see like a database on this. Maybe that's something we can do as a community. Anyway, moving on, let's get the still heating up. Because we are running 2 plates and a D flag above it, this is going to be a game of balance. Balance between the amount of power going up and the amount of cooling power going into the deflagonator. We want to have our plates loaded and bubbling away, but we don't want to completely flood them. In other words, we don't want the liquid to just keep rising and rising and rising on each of those plates. The more power you put into the pot at the bottom, the more vapor that is going up, but the more cooling power you have above, the more of that vapor is turning back into liquid and coming down again. It can be an intricate little dance. Don't be afraid to just turn the power off and let all the liquid drop back down the column until you get the balance just right. The cooling power, or the amount of water going into the product condenser, is not part of this equation. It's just about how cold you want the liquid coming out down the bottom. I would suggest if you aim for drips coming out the bottom at about 20 degrees Celsius, that's that in Fahrenheit, things are going to be pretty damn good. Now that we're up and running, we need to deal with quote-unquote foreshots and heads. For something this size, honestly guys, take like 50 mils worth of fours and just throw it away and you'll be totally fine, because we're going to take a whole lot more heads and remove that from the product as well. This one's a little bit harder. There's no like rule for this, and with brandy, the issue is that a lot of the fruity flavors come near the heads, but a lot of the nasty stuff comes in the heads too. So we're trying to really decide at what point we want to make the switch. I would suggest making this cut based on your nose and your sense of taste. Initially, right after you take the 4 shots, it's going to smell almost like potpourri, like weird, fake, estery, fruity stuff. We don't want that. Right after that, it's going to start clearing up, and it's going to smell and even sometimes taste kind of like vodka. There's not really anything there. Don't let that fool you, because next you're going to hit a weird place where it gets kind of acidy. Sometimes it can be like almost like rubber tube, like inner tube in a car or a bicycle, or baby sicky, or even cementy. That's what you're looking for. Once that's passed and cleaned up, now you're into the hearts. Well, and truly into hearts, and we're definitely getting some interesting brandy flavors coming through, which is good. There's hope for this run yet. This is, however, a great time to point out the advantage of a modular style kind of hybrid still like this. We can take it apart, we can run it in pot still mode, we can run it with 1 plate or 6 plates, whatever we desire. And the great thing about that is for smaller test runs like this. Normally, running something like a brandy, I would rather run it with a stripping run and then a spirit run. But if I stripped this 20 odd liters out, I'd have, I don't know, maybe 3-4 liters to go back into the pot. I wouldn't have enough volume to cover the element. Maybe you just prefer running smaller volumes as well. So having a still like this where I can run 2 plates as a one and done run pretty closely mimics, in my mind, double pot distillation. This honestly is probably slightly cleaner. Going down to 1 plate would be slightly dirtier in my mind, but it's awesome. Great for testing, or if you just want to do smaller batches. The hearts are what we want to collect, and how much of it you collect is going to be entirely based on your setup, what it is that you're fermenting, the style of still you're running, and so on and so forth. For me, for this run, I decided to switch from hearts to tails. When it started to get a little bit rough, it started to get a little bit almost meaty and weird, and just a little bit somewhere between acrid and bitter. Those are all things that I don't want in my final product, so I cut from hearts to tails and only keep the hearts. A quick note here to say that you don't have to make brandy from grapes. In fact, you can ferment and distill just about any fruit on the face of the planet and make a brandy. Whether or not it's going to be a good brandy or a bad brandy, that's going to depend on the fruit you make it from. In fact, Kyle from Clawhammer has written an interesting article that includes a bunch of information about this, and also more of a breakdown on actually how to make brandy. So if you enjoy reading information like that, I'll leave a link in the description below. Here we have the final product, which is all the hearts we kept, proofed down to I've chosen 60% ABV for now. We'll talk about that in a second. Proofing, literally all it is taking the alcohol that you're keeping and mixing it with water to hit a certain proof or ABV. The easiest way to do that is to use a calculator. I'll put links in the description for the Chase the Craft calculators page. There's a proofing calculator there. Anyway, let's have a wee bit of a sniff and a taste, shall we? Okay, right off the bat, the nose on this is better than the nose on the cheap box wine. The nose on the cheap box wine was a little bit flabby, kind of like old oxidized kind of raisins or prunes. This is much more vibrant. Definitely has some of that kind of ribena-y fruit, but it also has an interesting, musty, kind of soft, almost leathery flavor, which is really interesting. I like that. I dig it. It also has that kind of grape skin and grape stem-esque characteristic that you get in grappa. It's not strong, but it's sitting there underneath it all, which once again, that's a flavor I like. I enjoy that. Some people don't. It's a preference thing. Okay, yeah, it's pretty similar on the palate. It is a little bit fiery. That is not abnormal in my experience for brandies, because like I said, we're playing that game of flavor versus mouthfeel and palate feel up near the heads. So I could proof this down to 40% ABV and have it as like a white kind of sipping, almost like a rakia, I guess you would call it. But I think what I want to do, and that's why this is sitting here, is I want to age this. I want to age most of it. So I reserve 500 mils to keep white, just to test, and that is 900 mils of product at 60% ABV. The oak in there is one of the Chase the Craft Maturation Sticks that was toasted and then charred and then used in, it wasn't a bourbon, I'd call it like a corn whiskey for about 6 months. It's been pulled out and I'm going to whack it into here. So it's a second use oak, which is, instead of giving all those crazy barrel spice characteristics and like barrel candy characteristics, it's going to be much more on the kind of glazed pastry sweetness and a real mellow oaky and a little bit of vanilla attitude to it. If you're interested in getting some oak that's been seasoned for 4 years in a Kentucky yard and then put into a little packet for you ready to use, you can get them at chasethecraft.com. Oh, and good news for the Americans. We now have Angel AG2, AM1, and Yellow Label available from our American warehouse. Now, is this actually cheap? That's such a hard question to answer because it's going to depend entirely on context and what's important to you. Is this cheaper than buying wine to ferment, to distill? Hell yes. This is, for me, it worked out at about half price, but depending on where you are and the price of wine and the price of these kits, you know, that might fluctuate. I can make, you know, this much sugar wash vodka for damn near next to nothing, but it's also totally a different thing. It's not the same. It's not comparable. The cheapest way to go about this would be to grow your own damn grapes, but you know, that's a whole lot of work and not something that I'm going to commit to. I do wonder, I really do wonder if maybe the way that these things could be used to higher effect and better efficiency would be to use them as an additional ingredient in something else. So instead of making 20 odd liters with this, how about making 100, 200 liters of Alan Bishop's Brandy recipe, which is essentially sugar, raisins, and oats, which tastes way more like this than I would have cared to admit, and then whacking one of these in there as well. I don't know. I think that could be kind of decent. What about adding it into other fruit? Maybe you have, I don't know, 20, 30 kilos of apples, which you crush up and throw into fermenters, and then put a box of this in as well to raise the ABV. That sounds like it could be potentially a better use for something like this. But I'm absolutely certain that some of you out there have already been doing some of these things. So if you have, drop a comment in the comment section down below and let the rest of us know how you've used it and how it's turned out, because I'm pretty interested to see. Anyway, that about sums it up. I think this has been a giant success. I'm looking forward to seeing what this tastes like in about a year. Giant thank you to the Patreons for being the people that support us day in, day out. And of course, thank you to Clawhammer for sponsoring this video. Links to their article and their stills in the description below. See you guys.